I was driving from Connecticut to my friend's place in West Virginia that day. The bastard was supposed to get engaged, and even though I didn't want to, I still had to attend his engagement ceremony since he practically threatened me to do so. I was well aware of the route since I had gone there quite a few times, so I had taken the familiar highway. I was cruising down the road, lost in my thoughts, when an unexpected pang of hunger hit me. I realized that the only thing I had eaten before heading out was a hamburger, and now I was starving. The road stretched out ahead of me, and I knew it would be hours before I came across another eatery. That's when I noticed an old and mysterious-looking restaurant on the side of the road. It was strange that I had never seen it before, but I still decided to go there. As I parked the car outside the restaurant, I saw a young boy, around 7 or 8 years old, playing with a ball. When he noticed me, he stopped and stared at me for a few seconds before running inside the restaurant. I followed him inside, only to find the place empty, except for a couple who seemed to own the restaurant, standing on the other side of the counter. The moment they saw me, they gave me an unnatural forced smile and welcomed me in unison. I was handed a menu and sat at one of the empty tables. As I perused the menu, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence of the place. After a few minutes, I decided to go with a plate of spaghetti and a bottle of Coke. While I impatiently waited for my food, my eyes roamed around the restaurant, taking in the surroundings. Despite its age, the place was spotless, with no dust or dirt in sight. The vines growing on the counter of the roof were a beautiful sight, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The boy I had seen earlier was still lingering around, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of curiosity and awe, as if I were a being from another world. His innocent gaze made me feel both uncomfortable and intrigued at the same time. As they brought the dish to my table, I couldn't help but ask how long the restaurant had been open, and their lips curved into a smile as they replied, "We have been here for a long time." Then they returned to the counter, where I had seen them standing when I entered. Feeling confused by the reply, I took a bite of the spaghetti. Unfortunately, I realized it was incredibly bland when it entered my mouth. Although I don't typically criticize food, the flavorless spaghetti disappointed me. I considered telling them about it, but I didn't want to hurt their feelings. After all, what could I expect from a restaurant in such a remote area? Thus, I quietly finished the dish and left the restaurant, feeling a bit underwhelmed by the experience. The plate of spaghetti I had was supposed to satisfy my hunger, but it left me feeling just as empty as I was feeling before. It was strange because I usually feel full after just a few bites. Despite this, I decided to continue my journey to my friend's place without eating anything else. I drove for 4 hours, passing through picturesque landscapes and scenic routes. Finally, I arrived at the engagement ceremony, where my friend Henry was waiting for me outside his house. His warm welcome made me forget all about my hunger. "How was the journey?" he asked. Nothing special, except for the worst spaghetti I've ever had on the way here," I replied, still feeling a bit queasy. "Where did you have it?" he asked curiously, raising an eyebrow. "Remember the highway where our car broke down once? There's an old restaurant nearby," I explained, hoping to jog his memory. "That's impossible. The area's deserted," he replied, looking perplexed. "I thought so too, but there's one at the side of the road. I'll show you someday," I said with a sense of adventure, excited to explore the area again. Maybe there were other places we never noticed besides that restaurant. We headed inside, ready to enjoy the engagement ceremony. After the ceremony ended, I decided to stop and visit Aunt Chloe before heading home. The drive was long, but the thought of seeing her after such a long time kept me going. As I entered Aunt Chloe's house, I felt a sense of comfort and familiarity. It had been too long since we last met. We discussed various things, and I was thrilled to know that I was one of the first people to learn about her recent pregnancy. Ever since I was a child, my aunt's presence in my life was invaluable. Despite our relatively small age gap of only 8 years, she held a special place in my heart that no one else could fill. She had a habit of indulging me, buying me toys and snacks, even when my mom was against it. Her infectious laughter and warm hugs made me feel loved and appreciated, and her kind words were always a source of comfort. Our bond was unique, and we shared a friendship that lasted through the years. We would spend hours talking about everything under the sun, from school to books to relationships. No topic was off limits, and I always felt like I could confide in her. As we grew, she became more like an elder sister than an aunt to me, and our relationship grew stronger. Looking back, the memories I have with her are the most treasured ones. From lazy afternoons spent watching our favorite movies to long walks in the park, every moment was precious. While talking to Aunt Chloe in the living room and reminiscing about the past, I heard her eldest daughter, who was heavily into the Gothic style, talking on the phone about a ghost sighting. Her words caught my attention. "Manny saw that restaurant too, when he was on that highway." My curiosity was piqued by what she said, and I couldn't help but ask her which restaurant she was talking about. Chills ran down my spine when she mentioned that it was a ghost restaurant. I initially thought she was joking or talking about some other place, so I asked her why she believed it was haunted. However, her response left me frozen in fear. As I drove back, Alicia's words echoed in my mind. I had planned to take a detour and explore a different route, but my curiosity got the better of me. I had to see for myself if what Alicia told me was true. While driving by the same road, I noticed nothing there. No restaurant, no building, just a barren land. Alicia's words played in my mind. "People say it appears once in a while, only to disappear for days. Unless it's a ghost restaurant, there's no possible explanation."
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
The storm. On the morning of my first day working on a cruise ship, the excitement that had been building inside me for weeks reached its peak. I could hardly contain my enthusiasm as I made my way to the ship, my heart pounding with anticipation. The sight of the vast, sparkling ocean stretched out before me was like a dream come true, and I felt a sense of awe at the sheer grandeur of it all. I had worked tirelessly to get to this point, overcoming countless challenges and obstacles along the way, but now, as I stepped aboard the ship and took my surroundings, I knew that all that hard work had been worth it. The feeling of accomplishment was indescribable, and I felt a surge of pride at having achieved my lifelong dream. My love for water was something that I had developed purely on my own. None of my family members had ever worked in the maritime industry, and my grandpa even had a water phobia. However, I was different. I had always been fascinated with water. Watching documentaries and listening to people's stories about their experiences on the open sea only fueled my desire to explore the vast blue waters myself. As I stepped onto the ship, the salty scent of the ocean filled my nostrils. The sounds of the waves crashing against the hull was music to my ears. However, I started feeling seasickness as the ship went deeper into the water. It was probably because of the tuna sandwiches I ate before coming on board. Still, it wasn't that bad, and I knew it would go away after a while. Time passed quickly on the ship, and while not everyone was friendly, I managed to make a few friends who shared my love for water. On the 5th day, around 2 a.m., I was working in the bar area when the announcement came. A massive storm was approaching, and we were instructed to take shelter in our rooms. Everyone started to act immediately as panic erupted, and my heart pounded as I rushed back to my cabin. Violent waves buffeted the ship, and the sound of the wind howling outside was deafening. I prayed that the ship would be strong enough to weather this storm. My heart was beating uncontrollably as I watched. The wind was cruel as it battered the ship, threatening to tear it apart. The waves were just as monstrous, rising and falling in a relentless assault that seemed capable of swallowing us whole. As the storm continued to rage on, the ship was tossed around like a mere toy in the hands of a giant. The sheer horror of this situation was palpable, as each one of us aboard trembled in fear. The sounds of things breaking and crashing could be heard with the storm's voice, a deafening roar that seemed to consume everything in its path. Amidst the chaos, there were faint screams of people coming from all sides, adding to the already terrifying atmosphere. As a staff member, I felt helpless and scared, unable to muster the courage to check on them. I know it was selfish of me, but I couldn't care less about others, knowing that my own life was at stake. I had been huddled in my room for hours, listening to the howling winds and crashing waves. Finally, the storm subsided, and I cautiously stepped out onto the hallway. The ship was in shambles. Broken furniture and personal belongings were strewn about, and the walls were scuffed and scratched. As I made my way to the upper deck, I saw that the damage was even worse outside. The deck was littered with debris. Pieces of metal, shattered glass, people's vomit, and torn canvas. As I made my way through the wreckage, I noticed many injured people and a few casualties, including 3 of my new friends. It was a heart-wrenching sight that I'll never forget. After what felt like an eternity, help finally arrived, but it took more than an hour for the rescue team to reach us. They immediately started taking care of the injured and transporting them to a nearby coast. I remembered sitting in the corner of the deck when women and children were rescued first. It was a chaotic and emotional scene, with people crying and screaming for help. When it was finally my turn, everything felt still unreal, as if it was a nightmare. My heart was pounding so hard that it took me a moment to realize that I was being rescued. It almost felt like a miracle that I had survived the ordeal. Luckily, I was one of the ones who managed to escape with just a few bruises and scrapes, but the experience left me shaken to my core. As I sat on the rescue boat, I couldn't help but think about how lucky I was to be intact while many lost their loved ones. I'd always dreamed of working on a ship, but now I realized that life on the sea was not all sunsets and calm waters. We made our way back to shore, and I knew that my time on the ship was coming to an end. I had seen and experienced too much, and I knew that I could never go back to it. It was a bittersweet feeling. On the one hand, I was sad to leave behind my dream job and the friends I'd made. On the other hand, I was grateful to be alive. As I stood on the shore, watching the chaos unfold before me, ambulances rushed back and forth, sirens blaring. As they transported injured individuals to the nearest hospital, the once calm and inviting ocean now looked like a menacing force, unleashing its fury upon anyone who dared to enter its domain. At that moment, I realized that my life held far more value than any dream job ever could. I couldn't bear the thought of putting myself in harm's way just for the sake of a paycheck. Don't get me wrong, I still loved the water and all of its beauty, but the sight of the ocean's wrath instilled a sense of fear in me that couldn't be ignored.
This happened last night, and honestly, I'm still a bit shaken up about it. I work evenings as a dispatcher in a medium-sized Midwestern city. I was driving home at 2 a.m. when I stopped for gas. In retrospect, it was stupid to have stopped at all. The gas station was poorly lit and empty of any other customers. But I knew the shady areas of town, and this was usually not one of them. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a middle-aged woman sitting on the curb across the parking lot. It was a cold night and had just started raining. The woman was not wearing weather-appropriate clothing and was drenched. When the woman saw that I was watching her, she called out to me from across the parking lot. My second of many stupid decisions that night was choosing to engage with her. I was worried for her, so I approached her to see what sort of help I could offer. "Hi, beautiful. I'm just trying to get home, but no one will help me. I'm trying to get into the city, but the cab ride is $60 and I only have $40. Can you help me?" I don't usually give money to panhandlers, but this woman seemed genuine. The weather was terrible, and my job centers around helping people, so I agreed. I told her I didn't have any cash, but if she would come inside with me, I'd take some money out of the ATM and give her a few bucks. I went inside for cash, but the ATM wasn't working. I apologized and told her there was nothing else I could do. She followed me back outside, idly chatting with me as I opened my driver's door to get in. Then, she got in my car. I was too shocked to say anything. I sat staring at her as she buckled herself into the passenger seat. As soon as she got in my car, her demeanor changed entirely. She no longer seemed, for as much as she did, extremely excited and restless. "Just take me to my aunt's house. She can give me money," she said. Of course, alarm bells are going off in my head. Although my first instinct was to tell her to get the hell out of my car, my guts told me that would be dangerous. She'd already proven to be unpredictable and seemed to be high. I didn't know if she had any weapon on her while forcing her way into my vehicle. I thought it had the potential to elicit a violent reaction. "Where are you asking me to take you?" "Just start driving. I'll tell you when to turn." "Nope. If you want me to consider driving you somewhere, I need you to tell me where we're going." I said that with no real intention of driving her anywhere. "Don't worry, honey. I'm not a bad chick. I'm not going to rob you. Just drive." "No. What's your aunt's address?" As I was asking her questions, she got agitated. We still had not left the gas station parking lot. I considered getting out of my car and going to the gas station for help, but she seemed to know and be friendly with one of the attendants inside. Besides, I wasn't about to leave her alone in my car. Finally, she snapped at me and said, "Why are you asking me so many questions? I thought we were friends. Don't you trust me?" "I work at the police department," I said. "It's my job to ask these sorts of questions." She flipped out and started yelling at me about being a snitch, about trying to get her into trouble, just generally losing her damn mind. At this point, I'm more scared than ever. I just wanted her gone, but my instinct still told me to get her out of my car. I decided to take a risk. "I'm not a police officer. I just work at a police department. Why don't I take you to Walmart and see if they have an ATM that works?" My idea was to get her out of the car as peacefully as possible and lose her in the store. She liked my idea and immediately calmed down. I knew that the driving off with the woman in my car was incredibly risky, but it seemed like my best option at the time. As we were driving, she kept talking to me. Her thoughts were erratic, bouncing all over the place. It sometimes seems difficult for her to follow through with a thought, but this is roughly how our conversation went. "I'm glad we're friends now. I've had about 5 or 6 people trying to get me. I'm going to come to your work tomorrow so we can arrest them." "Okay, we can talk about it tomorrow. Tonight, you said you were trying to get home." "Yeah, honey. I'm really trying to get out into the sticks." "Sticks? I thought you said you wanted to get to the city." Yeah, I meant city. That's what I meant. That's why the cab ride's $40. It's far away." "The cab ride's $40? "Yeah, baby. You said you had $40. "I do, baby, but I have $40 for the cab ride." And then there was silence. "Are you sure you can't take me to my aunt's house?" "Sweetie, she lives down on Fuller Road." "That's not what you said before." "Oh no, baby, I'm sorry." "Oh, it doesn't matter. She won't give me the money anyway. Are you sure you can't just take me to the city?" It was terrifyingly obvious that this woman was utterly full of crap, because the details of her story were constantly changing. When we pulled into the Walmart parking lot, she finally got out of my car, only after I left first, and followed me into the store. I told her before we went to find an ATM that I needed to use the restroom. I planned to call the police from inside the stall, but she followed me into the bathroom. And that's when things got weird. She grabbed onto the crook of my arm and whispered in my ear, "If you don't have any money, that's okay. Let me ask you something, sweetie. Do you like being eaten out?" I told her no as forcefully as I could manage, get into a stall, locked the door as fast as I could manage. As soon as I had a barrier between us, I said, "You know, I have some friends at the police department that could probably help you better than I can. I'm just going to call them and see if we can figure this out together." Again, at the mention of the cops, she began screaming at me, and I just kept reiterating that the police would help her. She snapped at me and she said she was going to leave and stormed out. But it wasn't over. I wanted to make sure she was gone. Sure enough, not 60 seconds after she left, she came into the bathroom and started banging on the stall door. Then she said something that scared me more than anything else. "Hey, come back to your car with me. I left my beer in your car." I blatantly told her no. I saw her get into my car, and she had absolutely nothing with her other than the clothes on her back. After that, she left the bathroom again and didn't come back. I waited a good 5 minutes before exiting the bathroom. I immediately found a manager who called the police for me. Thankfully, I was in a different police jurisdiction from the one I worked because I was mortified at how entirely stupid I had been for the whole night and would have died of embarrassment. If a coworker had responded, the officer that responded took my statement and advised me to be more careful in the future. He said that sometimes panhandlers turn violent, and that just recently there had been a woman who matched my description of assaulting the Good Samaritan that had stopped to try to help her. I learned my lesson on stranger danger, and I'm lucky to have come out unscathed. I'm glad my stupidity didn't kill me. So, fellow listeners, the next time you try and help a stranger late at night, don't.
For context, I am female and currently 21 years old, though at the time of this event I was 16 years old. I have never viewed myself as an attractive person. I've always been kind of chubby. I had bad acne in my teen years. I never cared at all what I wore, and I almost never wore makeup. I was an extremely awkward teen who had barely any friends and next to no self-esteem due to a very abusive relationship I had a few years prior, but that's a different story entirely. My point is that I was a completely different person during this time, and looking back, I know how naive I was and what I should have done instead to better protect myself. So it was the year 2015, and I was going on my very first cruise with my family. It was an 8 days, 7 nights cruise that was taking place a few days after a tsunami had passed nearby. After a rocky start, literally the boat rocked back and forth the first 2 days and everyone was miserable, and me suffering a slight panic attack during a routine evasion drill. I'm claustrophobic and really hate crowds. It ended up being one of the best weeks of my life, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Some of the downsides to this cruise was the fact that it was a North State cruise taking place in October, which meant chilly weather and no swimming, and because it was during a school year, I was the only guest my age on that cruise. The closest age to me, I think, was either 6 years old or 40 years old, so that kind of stunk, although I did end up crushing hard on our assistant dinner time waiter who was around 30 years old and had the sweetest smile I'd ever seen. Anyways, time to get to the meat of the story. So as far as I know, most cruises have at least one formal night where everyone dresses up really nice for dinner and they serve special meals like lobster, steak, etc. As I said before, I wasn't the most attractive person out there, but I did doll myself up for this special occasion. I wore a turquoise knee-length dress, tan-colored high heels, my mom curled my blonde hair, and I put on some makeup that really made my blue eyes pop. I honestly did feel kind of pretty that night. Dinner was amazing and I finally got to try lobster tail for the first time. Loved it. I also, of course, made eyes and mildly flirted with our assistant waiter. I made him laugh because of how red my face would get whenever my dad called me out on it. So after our dinner, my family and I all decided to go our separate ways for the night. There was a bunch of events going on that each of us wanted to get to. Well, except for me, who spent most of the cruise finding random relaxing spots to sit and draw. I was, and I've always been, an avid artist. So anyways, after a couple of hours, I decided I wanted to find my dad for some reason that I don't exactly remember. My mom had told me that he was going to the karaoke thing going on, so I started making my way around the ship, looking for wherever this was happening at. That's when I met him. I noticed him staring at me, and at first it was flattering. Like I said, I was average looking and had next to no self-esteem, so having anyone of the opposite sex look at me and smiling made me feel good. He looked to be not too much older than I was and was dressed in a cruise employee uniform, so I decided to approach him and ask if he knew where the karaoke room was. His smile never left as I asked him, and in a thick Indian accent he told me that he didn't know, but that we could search together for it. I thought it was a little weird at first that he was an employee but didn't know where an event was taking place, but I brushed it off and thought it was possible for some newer employees to not know where everything was yet. So he and I started walking around the ship together and casually chatted while doing so. He told me his name was Felix and was 21 years old. He also, as I suspected, did recently start working for this cruise liner a few months ago. For the record, I did find him kinda cute and liked how comfortable he felt talking to me about his life. As we continued walking around, he told me about how he was born and raised in India, how his family was kind of poor, how rooster fights were illegal back home but he watched them anyways and stuff like that. I enjoyed listening to his stories about life in a different country, considering I've never been anywhere but America at this point in my life. We had eventually stopped looking for my dad and were just walking and talking together. We were now standing outside on the deck and leaning against the railing. I admired how beautiful and ominous the dark water reflected the stars. It was as if we were floating in the galaxy. It was completely beautiful. He then started telling me how lonely he was and how hard it is working on a cruise ship and watching hundreds of couples being romantic together while he has no one. I told him that I understood how he felt because I was also single and hated feeling alone. He looked at me and told me he was surprised that I don't have a boyfriend because of how beautiful I was. I blushed and looked away as I told him that most guys back home don't look at me twice, and he was surprised by that. You know that feeling when someone or something is behind you, and you can't see it, but you know you can sense it's there? Well, I felt something behind my head, and when I turned around to find out what it was, before I realized what was happening, Felix's face was right in mine, and he planted an unexpected kiss on me. I pulled back in surprise, and he asked me what I thought about it. I stuttered nervously and tried to think of a reply. Now, yes, I was a naive young person who was always looking positively at people, but I wasn't completely stupid. This is a 21-year-old stranger who was flirting with a 16-year-old girl. I also had the sudden realization that no one knew where I was or who I was with. Before I could even say anything, Felix started telling me how he knew of a couple of spots on this ship where we could be alone to do things together. I started panicking and really wanted to get away from him. Now, another fault of mine is that I'm way too nice for my own good, and I'm always afraid of hurting people's feelings or coming across as a mean person, even when I'm clearly in a dangerous situation. I'm still too friendly to everyone now, but nowadays, I have much more of a backbone and wouldn't have a problem telling someone like Felix to kindly screw off. But as I said, I didn't have that confidence back then, and I had no clue how to get out of this situation. Felix put his arm around my waist and started guiding me toward one of the areas he was talking about. I started stuttering. Maybe we shouldn't. We just met, and we might get caught, and you'd be in trouble, and my father might be looking for me. I know that sounds dumb, but I was trying to make him think of ways where this could be bad for him, so it seemed like I was trying to look out for him. Don't judge me too harshly. He told me not to worry about it because people mess around with staff sometimes and their boss never finds out. That only made me panic even more. He leaned in for another kiss, and I stupidly let him because I was scared of making him angry. After the long, uncomfortable kiss, I slightly turned away and told him I just wanted to keep looking at the night sky. He insisted that we should start messing around because we don't have much time together. I tried to hold back from crying at this point. And by the grace of the good Lord above, my phone suddenly made a noise, and I noticed my father had texted me asking where I was. I tried to mask my relief, but I immediately told Felix that I had to get going because my dad was wondering where I was and that he was very protective of me. Felix showed his disappointment to me saying that, but then he asked me for my phone number. My heart sank, and I gave it to him. Again, stupid young female who doesn't know how to say no. I'm aware of how foolish that was. It was a good thing I didn't give him a fake, though, because he immediately texted my number to prove its authenticity. Once I thought he was satisfied, I started saying goodbye and walking away. He grabbed my wrists and spun me back toward him and asked for a hug goodbye first. I sheepishly agreed and gave him a light hug, I wanted to start crying when he squeezed me tight and pulled me against his groin and asked if I could feel it, if you know what I mean. I quickly stepped away and sped walked towards my hotel room. I made sure he didn't follow me, and once I was safely inside my room, I hopped on my bed and started crying. Of course, I couldn't tell my parents about this because I would be in trouble for putting myself in this situation, or so I thought. I promise my parents aren't really like that. I know now that in reality my former Marine father would have tracked Felix down and let him know to never touch his daughter again. A few minutes into my cry, my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number claiming it was Felix. I wanted to block him immediately, but again, stupidly, I was afraid that would anger him and he would somehow find me. So I answered him and we talked for a few minutes. We kept talking about how he wanted to see me again before I left the next day, which at this point I repeatedly thanked God for, and I kept telling him that it just wasn't possible because my parents didn't want me leaving my room for the rest of the night, which was a lie. I did eventually end up leaving my room and asked an older female employee where the karaoke event was, which she immediately took me to. Side note, the room was literally 2 hallways down from where I first found Felix, and I kicked myself for that later. I found my dad and didn't leave his side for the whole rest of the night. Luckily, I was able to enjoy the rest of my night dancing around with my father, and I did hide around him whenever I spotted Felix walking around, who was making it obvious that he was looking for me. I know the story isn't as scary as the most on here, but at the time, it was terrifying to me, and my own kindness could have got me into a very bad situation. The moral to my story is that everyone needs to be careful when going on cruises or other types of vacations. Just because someone wears an employee uniform doesn't mean they're trustworthy. There's many people out there who take advantage of kind people and want to use that against them. Just please make sure whoever you're with always knows where you are, and don't put yourself into risky situations.